He walked into the orphanage expecting a photo op. Instead, two identical boys looked up at him with eyes that mirrored his own. And in that moment, the billionaire CEO knew. His past hadn't just caught up with him, it had names. The polished black SUV pulled up to the entrance of the St. Clair Children's Home precisely at 10 a.m. It was a crisp autumn morning, the air sharp with wind and the smell of distant rain. The orphanage building loomed ahead, red brick, aging but clean, with windows that somehow felt both watchful and worn. A set of white double doors stood beneath a fading sign, swinging gently with each gust. Nicholas Scott stepped out of the vehicle with his usual commanding presence. 35 years old, impeccably dressed in a navy blue suit tailored so precisely it moved with him like a second skin. His shoes shined like glass. His dark brown hair was styled neatly, and his deep-set hazel eyes scanned the exterior with polite indifference. The man had built half of downtown Manhattan with his name engraved on the marble. Yet here he was, standing outside a small orphanage like a stranger in an alien world. A woman rushed out to greet him. Thin, cheerful, and overly eager, as many PR handlers often were. "Mr. Scott, thank you so much again for coming," she said, extending a clipboard. "This will mean a lot to the board, and of course, the kids. Photographers will be discreet. We've arranged for a quick tour of the facility, then maybe you could say a few words?" Nicholas nodded absently, eyes still fixed on the building. "How long will this take?" 45 minutes, tops." He followed her in with mechanical grace, not because he wanted to, but because it had been scheduled. His assistant Claire had insisted. "It humanizes you," she'd said. "You're the face of the company now. People want to see your heart, not just your headlines." He didn't believe in theater like this, but he understood optics. The lobby was warm, surprisingly clean, painted in faded yellows and soft greens. Hand-painted artwork from children lined the walls. Sons with smiling faces, stick figures holding hands. A pair of small sneakers had been left by a bench, forgotten or perhaps outgrown. He was led down a narrow corridor, his footsteps heavy on the tile floor. The further they walked, the more the world outside seemed to fade. The meetings, the contracts, the high-rises and hedge funds, until all that remained was this long hallway with peeling wallpaper and the distant sound of laughter. They reached a room labeled Activity Space. A social worker opened the door with a soft knock. "Mr. Scott would like to meet some of the children," she said gently. Nicholas stepped inside. There were about 20 children in the room, scattered across bean bags and carpeted squares, building towers from wooden blocks or flipping through books. The room had a cozy kind of chaos. Crayons spilled across a table, mismatched socks on small feet. And yet in the middle of it all, sitting perfectly still, were two boys, twins. They sat side by side near a bookshelf, each holding the same book. Their backs were straight, their expressions serious. They had chestnut brown hair, pale skin, and wide, steady eyes. Even among all the movement and noise, they were quiet, too quiet, observing, calculating, watching him. Nicholas froze. He couldn't explain the feeling. It wasn't shock exactly, more like a cold current rushing through his chest, recognition without memory, a whisper inside him, low and urgent. "Look again." They were identical. 9 years old, maybe 10. One had a faint scar above his eyebrow. The other sat with one shoelace untied, his leg bouncing faintly. The PR handler leaned in and whispered, "Those are the Lawrence twins. They've been here for a couple of years. Bit reserved, but incredibly smart. No known relatives. The case file said their mother passed away. Father unknown." Nicholas's ears rang. Lawrence. The name shot through him like a crack of thunder. His throat tightened. He took a half step forward, then stopped. One of the boys, the one with the scar, locked eyes with him. It wasn't the stare of a curious child. It was piercing, knowing, like looking into a mirror from long ago. Nicholas tried to speak but couldn't. His breath caught in his throat. His entire body stilled, caught between the echo of a past he had buried and the shocking, impossible present that stood before him in duplicate. He was a man who thrived on facts, on numbers, on logic. But in that moment, none of those things could explain why these boys, these strangers, looked like something Someone he once knew or loved. His jaw clenched. He turned abruptly to the social worker. "I want to know who they are," he said. She blinked. "Excuse me?" "The twins. I want their full case files." "Mr. Scott, that's highly restricted information. Unless you're—" "I'm not here for a photo," he said, voice low, sharp. "I want to know everything." The room grew quiet. One of the twins tilted his head, not frightened, not eager, just curious. Nicholas looked back at him, and for a single breathless moment, he saw her eyes, her mouth, her shadow. He turned and walked out of the room. The photo op never happened. The press was told he had a sudden emergency. But Nicholas wasn't thinking about PR anymore. He was thinking about Sophia, about a name he hadn't said aloud in years, about a girl with chestnut hair and fire in her voice, and about a goodbye that suddenly felt like the biggest mistake of his life. Outside, the wind had picked up, sending leaves skittering across the sidewalk. Inside, Nicholas stood in the corridor, heart pounding, his hands shaking. For the first time in years, he felt something he didn't recognize. Fear. Nicholas sat alone in the back seat of his car, unmoving, while the city passed by outside his tinted windows. The driver said nothing. He knew better. Nicholas had canceled the rest of his day. Meetings were postponed, calls ignored. For the first time in years, he simply didn't care. His hands were still clenched, resting on his knees. His heart hadn't returned to its normal pace since the moment he locked eyes with those boys. The twins. The Lawrence twins. He couldn't get their faces out of his mind, their stillness, their eyes, his eyes. He had no proof. No DNA test, no paperwork, nothing but instinct. But instinct had never failed him in business. And this was no different. Somewhere deep in his bones, in his blood, he knew. Those boys were his. But how? The name. That was the first sign. Lawrence. He remembered it now. It was Sophia's mother's maiden name. She used it as a nickname sometimes back when they were still together. Back when everything was simpler. Back when he believed the only thing that mattered was the empire he hadn't yet built. Sophia Morris. He hadn't thought of her in years. Deliberately, forcefully. She had been the kind of love that stuck. The kind that made you question your own convictions. They had met in college, both hungry for the future, but in different ways. She wanted meaning. He wanted success. And when those paths diverged, he chose the latter. He left her behind. He'd never known she was pregnant. He stared out the window at the blur of city traffic. Honking cars, lights changing, people crossing intersections with phones in hand. But everything outside looked irrelevant. Because now nothing mattered except the truth. He pulled out his phone and dialed. "Claire," he said when his assistant answered, "I need a private investigator. Discreet. Someone you'd trust with your life." There was a pause. "Do I ask why?" "No," he said. "Just find them. I need information on a woman named Sophia Morris, from Boston originally. About 30 years old, brunette, brown eyes. I want everything." He hung up. Back at home, his penthouse felt colder than usual. The vast floor-to-ceiling windows offered a glittering view of the skyline, but it only made him feel more distant from everything. He poured himself a drink, scotch, neat, and stood in the middle of the living room, still in his suit, still feeling like a stranger in his own life. He hadn't even realized how long he'd been standing until his phone buzzed again. It was a message from Claire. "PI secured. You'll have a report in 72 hours. 3 days. It might as well have been 3 years. He paced. Saturday stood again. He pulled out an old laptop from the closet, one he hadn't used in years, the one that still had the emails from back then. He logged in with muscle memory. The inbox was long since inactive, but when he searched for her name, Sophia Morris, a few emails appeared. One in particular. "I hope you find what you're chasing, Nick, but I won't wait forever." He remembered the day she sent it. He had just closed his first investment round. He'd been buzzing with adrenaline. And when she asked him with quiet hope, "Do you still see a future for us?" He hadn't lied. He'd simply told her the truth. "I don't know." It was the last time he heard from her. He opened another email, an old photo. She was standing on a street corner in Boston, wearing a red scarf, laughing at something just outside the frame. Her eyes were alive, her hair loose. She was beautiful in the way that made you believe she could break and rebuild you all in the same breath. He closed the laptop gently and leaned back in his chair. And that's when it hit him. If Sophia had known she was pregnant, if she had known and chosen not to tell him, why? He didn't want to believe she would keep that from him. But he also remembered how hurt she was, how easily, how cleanly he had walked away. Maybe she had wanted to protect them. From him, from his ambition, from his selfishness, from his absence. He stood up again, restlessly moving toward the windows. The city was so alive, so loud, so full, but none of it reached him. Not anymore. All he could see were two boys sitting quietly on a rug in a worn-out orphanage, watching him like ghosts from a life he never lived. They were out there. And if he was right, he had missed the first 9 years of their lives. He clenched his jaw. Not a second more. This time he wasn't walking away. This time he was going to find the truth, no matter what it cost. 72 hours passed like 72 slow-burning storms. Nicholas barely slept. He barely ate. Time folded in on itself. Each minute stretched across a growing ache he couldn't name, a tightness in his chest, a weight behind his eyes. He had built a life where he controlled every outcome, every risk, every return, every headline. But this was out of his hands until his phone lit up. New message from Claire. Report just came in. PDF attached. You need to see this. His heart kicked hard in his chest as he opened the file. Dozens of pages, names, addresses, photos, records. But he didn't skim. He read every word. Sophia Elena Morris, born in Boston, college at NYU, moved to Los Angeles in her mid-20s. No criminal record, clean employment history, worked as a part-time teacher's aide, then later in hospitality, and in the final years, janitorial work at a public hospital. Diagnosed with lymphoma at 28, passed away at 30. No funeral, cremated, no listed next of kin. He stopped breathing somewhere between the dates. He reread the line about the diagnosis 3 times, hoping the words might rearrange themselves. But they didn't. Sophia had died. Alone. The final section of the report focused on the children. Thomas and Jake Morris, born September 9th, 9 years ago. No father listed on the birth certificates. Taken into state custody 3 years earlier, when their mother was hospitalized and unable to care for them. She had left them with a neighbor named Gloria King, who kept them for weeks before surrendering them to the system, stating she didn't have the means. The last page was a scanned copy of a handwritten medical intake form. At the very bottom, under emergency contact, Sophia had written one name in tiny, tight handwriting. Nicholas Scott. Next to it, she had drawn a shaky line through the words, scribbled beneath it, "Do not contact." No longer in his life. Nicholas sat frozen. There it was, in her own hand. The answer to the question that had haunted him. Why didn't she tell me? Because she didn't think he wanted to know. And once upon a time, she might have been right. He leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling, emotions pulling at him from opposite ends. Guilt, fury, devastation, awe. Sophia had protected him from responsibility, from fatherhood, from everything, even in the end, when she had no one. She had kept the boys safe as long as she could, and when she couldn't, she tried to leave them something better, something permanent, and he had never known. He got up suddenly, pacing the room. The floor felt uneven beneath his feet, or maybe he just felt off balance. The report still trembled in his hand. He dropped back into the chair and opened the photo folder. The first picture took his breath. Sophia in a hospital bed, a pale scarf around her head, smiling barely, but smiling, and sitting beside her, one boy on each side holding her hands. It looked like they were saying goodbye. He stared at the photo for what felt like hours. The second image was even harder. It was a scanned crayon drawing. 2 boys. A woman between them. All 3 holding hands. The sky was full of stars. A label in a child's handwriting. Me, Jake, and Mommy. Daddy is in the sky. Mommy says he's far away. Nicholas put his hand over his mouth and leaned forward, elbows on his knees. The image seared into his brain. That drawing, it wasn't about hope. It was about making peace with absence. They had lived their lives believing their father didn't want them. And the truth? The truth was that he never even gave them the chance. He didn't remember walking to the window, but there he was, staring out at the glowing city, hands gripping the windowsill. His voice, when it came, was low, hoarse. "I'm sorry, Sophia," he whispered. "I'm so goddamn sorry." And then for the first time in years, Nicholas Scott, billionaire, CEO, boardroom warrior, let himself cry. Not quiet, stoic tears, real ones, raw and choking and full of everything he had never said, everything he had never done. It wasn't just grief for her. It was grief for the life they could have had, for the boys he'd never held, for birthdays missed, stories unread, scraped knees he never kissed better. He had spent 9 years living in skyscrapers while his sons, had been shuffled through a system that didn't even know his name. The next morning he woke early. He didn't go to the office. He didn't check the market. He dressed simply. Dark jeans, a white button-up shirt, no suit, no performance. He walked into his private study, opened a drawer, and pulled out an old photograph of him and Sophia. It had been buried there for years. She was smiling wide, pressed against his shoulder, his arms around her waist. They looked like a promise never fulfilled. He placed it in his pocket. Then he picked up the phone and called his legal team. "I need custody options," he said. "I want it done right, but I want it done fast." "And the mother?" they asked. "She's gone," Nicholas said, steady now. "But she left me something. 2 reasons to get it right." He ended the call and stood in the quiet of the room for a long time. He wasn't thinking about legacy anymore. He was thinking about 2 boys. 2 boys who didn't know yet that their father had just decided to fight for them with everything he had. Nicholas stood in front of the orphanage gate again, this time without the suit, the cameras, or anyone telling him how to smile. He wore a simple gray sweater and black slacks, his sleeves rolled up, his expression unreadable. But his eyes, those eyes carried the weight of a man who hadn't slept right in days. It was early, quiet, no PR team, no schedule, just him. The same doors, the same faded sign, the same peeling paint. But everything felt different now. He didn't buzz the intercom right away. He stood there gripping the metal gate, heart pounding. It wasn't nerves. He'd faced billion-dollar lawsuits, congressional panels, hostile takeovers. He wasn't afraid of conflict. What he was afraid of, truly, deeply, was being seen. Not as Nicholas Scott, the empire builder, but as the man who had missed 9 years of his children's lives. Finally, he pressed the call button. A nurse he didn't recognize opened the door and tilted her head in surprise. "Mr. Scott," she asked cautiously. "I'm here to speak with the director," he said quietly. "It's personal." They brought him inside without question. This time, the halls didn't feel quaint or charming. They felt heavy. Every hand-drawn picture, every worn backpack by a classroom door, it all screamed of resilience in a place that shouldn't need to be resilient. He walked slowly, the sound of children's voices distant but steady. The director met him in a cramped office with 2 chairs and a metal desk that had seen better decades. "You're back," she said carefully. "Yes. I'll be honest, I didn't expect that." "I didn't expect a lot of things," he replied. "But I need to talk to you about the Lawrence twins. Tom and Jake." Her expression shifted, guarded now. "What about them?" "I believe they're my sons," Nicholas said without blinking. "I have reason to believe I'm their biological father." She didn't speak for several seconds. "Is this some kind of experiment? A trial run for philanthropy? Because they don't need—" "No," he interrupted. "This isn't for the press. This is real." He reached into his coat and placed the folder on her desk. The report, medical records, Sophia's note, her name, his name, the whole truth. The director read silently, and with each page, her face changed. By the end, she looked up with a mix of disbelief and something else. Sadness. "They've been through a lot," she said finally. "They lost her slowly, piece by piece, and they never knew who you were." "I know," Nicholas said quietly. "I don't expect a warm welcome. I just want a chance to make it right." She studied him for a moment longer. "They're in the library. They spend a lot of time there." He stood. "Can I see them?" She hesitated. "Only if you're ready for them not to care." "I'm not here to be liked," he replied. "I'm here to stay." She nodded and led him down the hall. The door to the library creaked open gently. It was a small room, shelves half full, paperbacks worn with use. At a corner table, two boys sat opposite each other, each with a book in hand. Jake was hunched over a comic, elbows on the table, chin resting in one hand. Tom was flipping through something thicker. Non-fiction, maybe. His brow furrowed, lips moving silently as he read. They didn't notice him at first. Nicholas stepped in quietly, letting the door click softly shut behind him. He watched them for a moment. His heart ached. Not from shock this time, but from recognition, from knowing. Every small gesture, every tilt of the head, they weren't just familiar. They were his. Jake looked up first. The same brown eyes, the same guarded stare. He blinked, then nudged Tom with his elbow. Tom looked up slowly. Neither of them said anything. Nicholas cleared his throat. His voice, when it came, was lower than usual. Vulnerable. Hey, I hope this isn't a bad time. Jake tilted his head. You're the guy from last week? Yeah, Nicholas nodded. That's me. What do you want? The question didn't sting. It grounded him. Jake wasn't being rude. He was protecting his brother. He respected that. I just wanted to talk, Nicholas said. If that's okay. Tom closed his book, watching him. His expression was calmer, more analytical. Are you here to adopt someone? Nicholas exhaled. Number. I'm here because I think I'm your father. The words sat in the room like smoke. Jake's face shifted. Disbelief, anger, something between the two. Tom blinked once, then again. That's not funny, Jake said sharply. Mom never said anything about you. I know, Nicholas said gently. I found out a few days ago. I didn't know you existed. If I had, he stopped himself. Excuses didn't matter. If I had, I never would have let this happen. I swear the room was too quiet. Where were you when she got sick? Jake asked. Nicholas stepped forward slowly, his voice soft. I didn't know she was sick. I didn't even know she had you. I left her before she found out. And she never told me. Maybe she didn't want you, Jake muttered. Tom turned to him suddenly. Jake? No, it's fine, Nicholas said. That's fair. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled something out. An old photograph, folded, a little faded. This is her, and me, from a long time ago. He laid it on the table. Tom leaned forward first. His fingers brushed the edges of the photo. Jake hesitated, then looked too. Tom's voice was almost a whisper. That's Mom. Nicholas nodded, swallowing hard. Yeah, that's her, and that was me. Back when I was stupid. Back when I didn't understand what really mattered. The boys said nothing. I'm not here to force anything, he continued, but I'd like to get to know you. Both of you, if you'll let me. Jake crossed his arms. Why now? Because now I know, Nicholas said. And once you know something like this, you don't walk away. Not again. Tom finally spoke, his voice low and measured. We don't need a hero. I know, Nicholas said, but maybe you deserve a father. He left the photo with them. Then without pressure, he backed away. I'll be here again tomorrow. Same time, he said softly. Even if you don't want to talk, I'll still come. Just in case, and then, without waiting for their approval or forgiveness, Nicholas Scott, a man who'd once built towers to outrun his guilt, walked out the door, choosing instead to build something far more fragile. Trust. One brick at a time. Nicholas returned the next day, not because someone told him to, and not because he felt he had something to prove, but because something inside him refused to let go. He had spent most of his life chasing acquisitions, watching spreadsheets, making decisions in rooms full of people who only cared about bottom lines. But now his entire world had narrowed down to one room, 2 chairs, and 2 9-year-old boys who didn't know whether to trust the man suddenly showing up at their table. This time he arrived early. He brought no camera crew, no corporate handlers, no perfectly worded speech, just 2 small cups of hot cocoa from a cafe nearby, the kind with real milk and cinnamon on top. One had extra whipped cream, the other was plain. He didn't know who preferred what, but he had a hunch they wouldn't match. The librarian glanced up when he entered, recognizing him immediately. She offered a small nod, nothing more. The kids were already there, just like the day before. Jake had his legs folded up in the chair, reading some superhero comic, while Tom sat upright, brows furrowed over a thick chapter book. They were immersed but not lost. He could feel it the moment they noticed him. Jake saw him first. He blinked once, then looked down quickly, pretending to refocus on the page. Tom followed a second later, his expression harder to read. He didn't look surprised. He looked like he expected this, but not necessarily in a good way. Nicholas approached slowly. "Hey," he said gently. "I didn't bring anything crazy. Just cocoa. I wasn't sure how you liked it, so one with whipped cream, one without." He placed both cups on the edge of the table and took a seat opposite them. No grand gestures, no fanfare. They stared at the cups for a long moment. Jake was the first to reach. He took the one with the whipped cream, muttering, "This one's mine." It wasn't gratitude exactly. It was a declaration of territory, a test. Nicholas let it sit, nodding slightly. Tom reached out more slowly, pulling the plain one toward him without a word. He held it for a while before taking a careful sip. His expression didn't change, but he didn't push it away. Small victories. Nicholas leaned back in his chair, unsure of what to say next. Every instinct he'd relied on in his adult life, strategy, persuasion, analysis, felt useless here. These weren't clients or investors. These were his sons. And no amount of charm could rush this. "Do you guys come here every day?" he asked, trying to keep his voice light. Jake shrugged. "Library's quiet. Better than the lunchroom." "Less people staring," Tom added, eyes still on his book. Nicholas nodded slowly. "I used to hide in libraries too when I was a kid. Not a lot of people know that." Tom looked up, just barely. "I wasn't very good at sports," Nicholas said. "But I read fast, real fast. Like a book a day fast." Jake raised an eyebrow. "You?" Nicholas chuckled softly. "Yeah, I didn't always wear suits, you know." Jake glanced at his brother. "You kind of still do." "Touché," Nicholas said, smiling. There was a beat of quiet. He didn't push conversation. He just sat with them, sipping his own coffee and watching the way they interacted. Jake was more expressive, always moving, fingers tapping the table, eyes darting, energy simmering just beneath the surface. Tom was different, focused, observant, controlled, like he was always 3 thoughts ahead of everyone else. It was surreal. He saw pieces of himself in both of them. After about 15 minutes, Jake finally asked, "So, what do you do exactly?" Nicholas blinked. "You mean for work?" "Yeah. I run a company. We build things. Hospitals, schools, bridges. Big stuff." Jake's eyes narrowed. "So you're rich." Nicholas hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, I guess I am." Jake leaned back. "That's why you left Mom?" The question hit harder than he expected. Not because it was cruel, but because it was real. Nicholas met his eyes. "I didn't leave her because I was rich. I left her because I thought becoming rich was more important than staying." Tom closed his book slowly. "Was it?" "No," Nicholas said quietly. "Not even close." Another silence passed, but this one felt softer. Jake fiddled with the empty cup. "She never talked about you. Not much. Sometimes I think she wanted to." Tom looked at Nicholas now, fully. "Why are you really here?" Nicholas took a breath. "Because I missed too much, and I don't want to miss anything else." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a worn-out leather notebook. He opened it and showed them a list, handwritten, of all their birthdays from year 1 to 9. "I wasn't there for these," he said, "but I know the dates now, and I'm not missing the next one." Tom stared at the notebook like it was a puzzle he couldn't solve. "I don't expect you to trust me right away," Nicholas said. "You don't even have to like me. But I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere." Jake crossed his arms, skeptical. "So what now? You just show up every day?" "If you'll let me," Nicholas said. "I can bring more cocoa." "You better get the whipped cream right again," Jake mumbled. Tom didn't speak, but he nodded, barely, almost imperceptibly. And for Nicholas, that was everything. That night, he sat in his penthouse surrounded by silence. But for once, it didn't feel empty. He looked at the photo of Sophia on the mantel, her smile forever frozen in time, and whispered, "They're letting me in. Just a little." And for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel powerful. He felt lucky. It began with a photograph. One morning, Nicholas took the boys to a local park. It wasn't a grand gesture. No yachts, no private helicopters, no VIP treatment. Just him, Jake, and Tom. They walked under soft October light, leaves crackling underfoot, cocoa in hand. Three figures moving quietly along a tree-lined path. They stopped to watch ducks gather by the water, and for once, Nicholas saw the boys relaxed, laughing even, pushing each other playfully over who could throw bread farther. He had no idea someone was watching. By evening, the photo was online. A grainy shot from behind a tree. Nicholas Scott, one of the most powerful men in the country, standing beside two boys who looked far too much like him for coincidence. The headlines spread like wildfire across gossip sites and business blogs alike. Billionaire Nicholas Scott's secret sons? Mystery boys raise big questions. It was everywhere by morning. Nicholas found out while scrolling his phone in the kitchen, still in a t-shirt and sweatpants, trying to figure out how to make pancakes from scratch for the boys, who had, to his dismay, banned frozen waffles. He stared at the screen for a long time, the coffee in his mug forgotten. Claire called before he could even hit refresh. "Nick," she said, not bothering with pleasantries. "It's out. It's ugly. And the board is already circling." "Let them circle," he replied. "I'm serious. They want a statement. So do the shareholders. This kind of scandal—" "It's not a scandal," he cut in. "It's my family." There was silence on the other end. "I need to know where you stand on this," Claire said softly, "publicly. Because if you don't speak first, they'll speak for you." He ended the call without answering. He walked back into the living room, where Jake and Tom were arguing over who had more syrup on their plate. Marshmallow, their increasingly ragged stuffed bunny, sat perched like royalty on the back of the couch. It was a mess, and it was perfect. But he knew what was coming. By noon, headlines had shifted from speculation to backlash. Investors were concerned. Shareholders demanded clarity. Anonymous sources quoted him as being reckless and emotionally compromised. By 3 p.m., the chairman of the board called a private meeting. Nicholas sat in the same room where he'd once negotiated mergers worth billions. Men in designer suits and women with stone-cold eyes stared across the long, polished oak table at him like he was no longer one of them. The chairman, Gregory Wade, 62, ruthless, calculated, leaned forward with steepled fingers. "Nick," he said, voice smooth, "we all respect what you've built. You've led this company to heights none of us imagined. But the situation with the children—" He let the word hang in the air, distastefully. Nicholas didn't flinch. "The children," he said evenly, "are my sons." Someone at the table shifted uncomfortably. "We don't dispute your right to a personal life," Gregory said, "but we're fielding calls from media outlets, banks, international partners. People want reassurance that your domestic entanglements won't affect business stability." Nicholas leaned back in his chair. "For years, I gave up everything for this company. Time, sleep, relationships, my humanity. And now I finally do something human. And that's the threat?" "It's about perception," Gregory said quickly. "You've always been a symbol of precision, control, and maybe that was the problem." Silence. Nicholas looked around the table. These people didn't know Tom and Jake. They didn't know what it was like to see your child smile at you for the first time and realize it's taken 9 years for that moment. They didn't understand what it felt like to read your name, crossed out on a hospital form by a woman you once loved, because she believed you wouldn't care. They didn't know, and they never would. "I'm not stepping down," Nicholas said, "and I'm not issuing some hollow PR statement to make anyone more comfortable. If the press wants a quote, here it is. Yes, I found out I had children I never knew about. Yes, I'm showing up for them now. And no, I don't regret it." Gregory frowned. "That kind of defiance won't play well with the markets." "Then let them fall for once." Nicholas stood, buttoning his blazer, voice calm. "You have my position. If the board wants to vote me out, take your shot. But just know this. If I have to choose between my company and my sons, I'll walk out that door without blinking." The room remained still. No one moved. No one voted. By the next day, the headlines had changed again. Nicholas Scott confirms fatherhood. If I have to choose, I choose them. Some called it brave. Others called it madness. Nicholas didn't read most of it. Because while the media swirled, while shareholders speculated and reporters scrambled for details, he was busy helping Jake with math homework and driving Tom to the bookstore for a new fantasy novel. He was learning how to cook eggs that didn't taste like rubber. He was figuring out bedtime routines and laundry schedules and how to answer hard questions like, "Why didn't you come sooner?" And slowly, very slowly, something inside him began to shift. He had always thought power came from control, control over outcomes, people, markets, but now he realized it came from something far more difficult: showing up, even when you're not perfect, even when you're late, even when it hurts. That was the kind of power no boardroom could give and no headline could take away. It was a rainy Sunday afternoon, the kind that softened the edges of the city and made the world feel smaller. Raindrops traced slow, crooked lines down the wide windows of Nicholas's penthouse. And somewhere in the kitchen, a pot of something simmered low on the stove. The boys had spent the morning lounging in flannel pajamas, building a complicated Lego set together at the coffee table, while Nicholas tried and failed to make grilled cheese without burning the edges. It had been a good day. Quiet, familiar, normal, which made what Nicholas had planned feel even heavier. He had known this moment would come. He couldn't build a future with them without first honoring the past. Her past, their past. And the boys deserved the truth. Not just the fragments they'd overheard or guessed at, but the real story, even if it hurt. He waited until after dinner. They sat around the table, the dishes pushed to the side. The air smelled faintly of butter and tomato soup. Tom was rereading the back of a mystery novel. Jake was doodling absently on a napkin. Nicholas looked at both of them, heart thudding. "I want to talk to you guys about your mom," he said. They both looked up. The room went still. Nicholas reached for something under the table. A shoebox, worn but neatly sealed. He placed it in front of them. This belonged to her. One of the nurses kept it after she passed. She said she didn't know who to give it to, so I asked for it. Tom stared at the box. Jake leaned back, suddenly quiet. "She didn't tell me about you," Nicholas said gently. "Not because she didn't care. I think she was trying to protect you, and maybe protect herself too." He opened the box slowly. Inside were little things: a few photographs, a dried flower pressed between note cards, a folded letter, a hospital bracelet labeled Sophia Morris, and in one corner, a tiny blue sock, baby-sized, faded, barely larger than Nicholas's palm. Jake was the first to reach in. He pulled out a photo. Sophia in a bright red scarf, her arms around two toddlers, both with familiar messy brown hair. One of the boys was holding a balloon. She was laughing. "That's me," Jake said softly. "That's us." Tom picked up the letter. "Can I read this?" Nicholas nodded. Tom unfolded the paper carefully, hands steady. It wasn't long, just a note written in Sophia's handwriting. That same strong, looping script he remembered from college. "If you're reading this, I'm not with you anymore. But please don't forget that you are made of love. Even if the world didn't always give it to you the right way, you were born from it. Tell them I tried. Tell them I wanted more time." Jake looked away. His mouth trembled, but he didn't speak. Tom read the last line aloud, voice cracking just slightly. "And if Nicholas ever finds you, tell him I'm sorry. But I needed to let him go." Nicholas leaned forward, resting his arms on the table. "I was young when I met your mom. Too young to understand what mattered. I left before I even knew she was pregnant. I didn't know about you. Not for 9 years. And I can never get that time back. But if I could, I would have done everything differently." The boys were quiet. Jake's fingers tightened around the photo. "She didn't want us to hate you." "No," Nicholas said. "She didn't. And she didn't hate me either. She just didn't want to burden anyone. She thought she could handle it on her own." Tom nodded slowly. "She did, for a while." "She did more than that," Nicholas said. "She raised 2 incredible boys, with strength I didn't deserve. And when she couldn't do it anymore, she still protected you. Even at the end." Jake finally looked up. His eyes were red. Why are you doing this? What do you mean? This. United States. Everything. You could have just walked away. No one would have known. Nicholas took a breath. Because I should have been there. And because I see you now. I can't go back, Jake. But I can be here. I want to be here. For the hard parts. The boring parts. The mornings when you hate me, and the nights when you don't want to talk. I want it all. Tom's voice was quiet. Even if we're not ready yet? Nicholas nodded. Especially then. There was a silence that didn't feel uncomfortable. Just full. Jake finally reached across the table and pushed the shoebox a little closer to Nicholas. You should keep it, he said. For her. Nicholas blinked quickly, then nodded. Okay. That night the boys fell asleep early, curled into opposite sides of the couch beneath a thick blanket, the Lego project unfinished beside them. Nicholas sat nearby, watching the city lights flicker through the rain-streaked glass. He held Sophia's letter in his hands, reading it again and again. It wasn't long, it wasn't dramatic, but it held her voice, her presence, and a grace he would never stop trying to live up to. He looked at his sons, really looked at them, and something in his chest shifted. They were his, and yet they weren't his to control. They had survived without him. They didn't need a savior. They needed someone who could sit beside them in the quiet and stay, and that's what he would do. He folded the letter carefully, placed it back in the box, and whispered, I found them, Sophia. I found them, and I'm not letting go. 1 year later, everything had changed, and somehow nothing had. Nicholas stood in the kitchen of his now slightly chaotic home, barefoot, flour-dusted on the front of his dark t-shirt, trying to follow a recipe he'd scribbled down on a napkin the night before. It was early morning, and the whole apartment smelled like cinnamon and burnt toast. He'd promised the boys cinnamon rolls for breakfast. Not the store-bought kind, real ones, from scratch. He didn't know what he was doing, but he was doing it. Behind him, soft footsteps padded into the kitchen. Jake, still half asleep in mismatched socks and an oversized hoodie, leaned against the doorway. You're burning something. I am fully aware, Nicholas said without turning. Tom entered next, rubbing his eyes. It smells like ambition and failure. Nicholas laughed, full, unguarded. The kind of laugh that came from somewhere deep in his chest. That's probably the dough. Or your pride, Jake added, grinning. Nicholas turned, face smeared with flour. You two want breakfast or not? They did. They always did. And they always came into the kitchen the same way now. No hesitation, no uncertainty. This was home. The past year had been a slow, stubborn miracle. Not perfect, not painless, but real. There had been nights of silence and mornings of tears, long talks that started with anger and ended in tears, and some that didn't end at all, just faded into the comfort of sitting quietly together. There were therapy sessions, school meetings, late-night grocery runs when one of the boys suddenly decided he needed peanut butter for a science project glue. Nicholas had learned how to braid a friendship bracelet, poorly. He learned that Tom liked history podcasts and Jake hated kale with every fiber of his being. He learned that bedtime wasn't about sleep, it was about stories, about presence, about whispering I'm still here without saying it. And he said it every day, in one way or another. Eventually the boys stopped asking if he would come back tomorrow, because now he simply did. On their first Christmas together, they didn't fly to Aspen or rent a chalet. They stayed home, built a tree from old books and ornaments made of clay. Nicholas gave them each a letter, handwritten, folded into 3 parts, about who he was then, who he had failed to be, and who he hoped to become. Neither of them said much after reading it, but that night, when they all watched movies piled on the same couch, Jake fell asleep on his shoulder. Tom didn't even notice that his hand was resting on Nicholas's knee the whole time, and now spring was coming. It was March 9th, one day before the boy's birthday. Nicholas had everything ready, the balloons, the cake recipe, the surprise gift hidden in the back of his closet, tickets to a science camp for Tom, and a sketchbook signed by a comic book artist Jake adored. He had never planned for birthdays before. Now he looked forward to them. But what he hadn't expected that morning was a knock at the door. It came just as he was pulling the rolls out of the oven. Slightly overdone, but not tragic. He opened the door, puzzled. Claire stood there. His longtime assistant, now more like family, held an envelope in her hand. "I wasn't sure when to give you this," she said, her voice quieter than usual. He took it, frowning. "What is it?" "She wrote you another letter," Claire said. "Sophia, the nurse who found the box, found this too, tucked into a medical file. It's addressed to you, but she must have never had the courage to send it." Nicholas held the envelope in both hands like it was made of glass. His throat tightened. Inside, Sophia's handwriting. The same sweeping, honest loops he hadn't seen in a year. "Nicholas, if you ever find them, if you ever choose to find them, I hope you don't run this time. I hope you stay. I don't want apologies. I don't want blame. I just want you to see them. See who they are. They're wild and gentle and full of questions. Jake is louder but not stronger. Tom is quieter but not softer. They are the very best thing I ever did. And maybe, just maybe, they'll be the best thing you ever do too. If you've read this, it means you showed up. That's already more than I ever expected. But if you stay, if you really stay, then maybe it was all worth it. S." He read it 3 times before he looked up. Claire didn't speak. She just squeezed his shoulder, then slipped back into the hallway, leaving him alone with a letter that felt like a benediction. When he walked back into the kitchen, the boys were at the table. Jake looked up. "Who was at the door?" Nicholas smiled, not the careful smile he used to give at meetings. A real one, the kind that came from bone-deep knowing. "Someone who reminded me I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." He sat down, pulled the tray of cinnamon rolls toward the center, and handed each of them a plate. Tom sniffed it. "This one looks edible." Jake nodded, mouth already full. "You're improving. Still a long way from good, though." Nicholas raised an eyebrow. Challenge accepted. They ate together, the soft rain outside giving way to sunlight. The apartment buzzed with the sounds of life. Messy, loud, real. Later that night, after the boys were asleep, Nicholas stood by their bedroom door for a while. He watched them, tangled in blankets and dreams. His sons, his family. He didn't say anything aloud. He didn't have to, because he had already made the promise 1,000 times over. In morning pancakes, in school pickups, in every moment of staying when it would have been easier to leave. And in the quiet of that room, Nicholas Scott, once a man who had built his life skyward to escape the ground, realized that his greatest legacy wasn't made of steel or glass. It was made of trust, of presence, of love. Chosen late, but not too late, and finally fully his. This story began with absence. A man who had everything, except the things that matter most: connection, truth, and love. Nicholas Scott wasn't evil, just lost in the architecture of his own ambition. He wasn't a villain, he was human. And sometimes the most human thing we do is run from what scares us, until life forces us to stop. The ending isn't about perfection. It's not a fairy tale because healing never is. It's messy, slow, and fragile. But what makes the conclusion powerful is that Nicholas didn't just feel regret. He did something with it. He showed up, again and again, not as a savior, but as a man learning how to stay. Tom and Jake didn't need a hero. They needed presence, patience, time, and they got it. Not from someone flawless, but from someone finally willing to grow. To me, the heart of this story is simple. You can't change the past, but you can choose who you become next. And sometimes that choice changes everything.